Reagan Miles didn't blend in. She wasn't trying to. Her black dress fit her like intention. It hugged her waist, curved around her hips unapologetically, and flowed like confidence in motion. She didn't need approval. She designed the dress herself. But approval didn't stop people from staring, especially not him. Before we get into this story, I need you, yes you, my beautiful family, to hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. It helps YouTube show this video to more people who need this kind of story in their life. I worked hard to keep this story short, sweet, and straight to the point. No dragging, no fluff. Just raw emotion, lessons, and power. Now, let me take you somewhere. Tristan Vales sat at the bar, one hand curled around a bourbon glass, the other scrolling through a glowing screen. Billionaire tech founder, creator of Venture AI. The man who once sold predictive algorithms to defense contractors before pivoting to healthcare wearables. Genius, ruthless. And right now, just another man who opened his mouth without thinking. You're bold to wear that, he muttered, low, lazy, almost as if he was complimenting her drink choice instead of tearing her down. 6 words, meant to sound casual, but they didn't land casually. Reagan's breath caught for a second. No gasp, no dramatics, just a small, sharp pause in her chest, one she'd mastered long ago, from boys in high school hallways, from boutique stylists who spoke with smiles but cut with their eyes, from white editors who'd politely rejected her designs for lacking universal appeal. She looked at Tristan, not down, not away, just at him. And when she finally spoke, her voice didn't tremble. I know, she said. Simple, lethal. Then she turned. She didn't wait for a reaction. She didn't give him one either. Instead, she walked, each step echoing on the marble floors like defiance. The dress he had dismissed? It didn't shrink. It swayed. She passed rows of high-ranking CEOs, investment moguls, and tech influencers. None of them stopped her. None of them mattered. At that moment, she wasn't shrinking. She was growing. Later that night, she sat in her Harlem apartment. No tears, no rage tweets, no breakdowns over wine. She turned on Coltrane, let the saxophone soothe her pulse. Then she opened her sketchbook. The pencil moved like muscle memory. She didn't think. She designed. Waistlines that kissed curves instead of cutting them. Seams that embraced rather than erased. Fabric that flowed over thighs the world told her to hide. And shoulders, bared, not caged. Rage wasn't the fuel. Reclamation was. She didn't text Marla to complain. Didn't tell her what Tristan said. She didn't need to. Because she knew. These weren't just designs. They were declarations. Across town, Tristan stood in front of a mirror in his penthouse suite. Half drunk. Loosened tie. Jacket tossed on the floor. He stared at his own reflection, not in vanity, but confusion. He hadn't meant to insult her. At least, not consciously. But something about her shook him. That walk, that confidence, the way she didn't flinch, the way she said I know, not like a victim, but like a queen. He poured himself another drink, but the bourbon didn't burn. Back in Harlem, Reagan whispered to herself while shading the last curve of her sketch. Let them stare next time. I'm not the one who needs to shrink. And with that, she pinned the sketch on the wall. Her studio wall, the same one that would soon become the birthplace of a revolution in fashion and tech. But for now, it held one thing. A dress born from disrespect. Not revenge, not pity, just the quiet power of a woman reclaiming her space. Have you ever walked out of a room not with anger, but with purpose? Not to argue, but to build something that made the insult irrelevant? Drop a fire in the comments if you've ever turned pain into power. And don't forget, your likes, your comments, they're what help this story reach the ones who need to hear it. Because this is only the beginning. The next morning, Reagan's bedroom was dim, but her mind was lit like wildfire. The sketch from the night before sat on her drafting table. She hadn't changed. She hadn't edited. It was raw. It was real. And it was hers. The outline of a fitted jumpsuit, a hybrid between sleek streetwear and formal flair, stood bold and shapely. It didn't hide the hips. It hugged them. Didn't cinch the waist. It honored the curve. Reagan stared at it. Last night she'd walked away. Today she would create forward. The sewing machine hummed like a heartbeat. Reagan stood barefoot in her Harlem apartment turned studio, draping fabric over the mannequin. Cotton blend with four-way stretch. Soft matte finish with structured hold. Her hands worked with certainty. No fear, no guesswork. Every stitch was a statement. Every cut was resistance. She didn't look at inspiration boards. She didn't scroll through trends. She looked inward. She thought of girls who'd been told their bodies were too much. Of women who'd bought 2 sizes larger to feel safe in a boardroom. Of the invisible ones. And she designed for them, not as clients, as mirrors. Later that week, she brought the sample to her mentor and old college professor, Eliza Odom, a respected name in adaptive design and one of the few women in tech fashion who'd made it on her own terms. Eliza didn't say much. She never did. She turned the garment inside out, checked the stitching, ran her hand over the inseams, then looked up. "This was born from heat," she said. Reagan nodded. "Don't cool it down." In the weeks that followed, she worked non-stop. 10 pieces, 5 models, 1 mission. She called it Miles' Curve, and she refused to pitch it to brands. She wasn't going to wait for their validation. Instead, she launched a digital campaign, shot in black and white, clean backdrops, no retouching. Each model introduced themselves with a single line of truth. "My waist doesn't need to shrink for me to matter. My thighs move when I walk, and so what? I'm not made for your gaze. I'm made for my existence." The response? Immediate. Retweets, reshares, DMs flooded with orders, emails from boutique buyers and independent outlets. Textile posted a feature. "Curvewear isn't just coming, it's here." Vogue Digital did a piece on the women redefining fit in techwear, and The Root featured her in their Black Innovation Spotlight, headlined, "Harlem designer creates fashion that thinks like the woman who wears it." Through it all, Reagan didn't brag. She didn't clap back at anyone from the gala. She didn't name-drop Tristan or reference the insult that had sparked her fire. Because this wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about finally walking in her right. One night, Marla came over with 2 bottles of wine and a tell-me-everything grin. "You've been dodging me," Marla teased. "I've been building." Marla flopped on the couch and scanned the sketches. "You really doing this?" Reagan nodded, sipping tea instead of wine. Marla narrowed her eyes. "You're glowing, you know." Reagan smirked. "I'm sleeping 4 hours a night and living on granola bars." "No," Marla said softly. "You're glowing because you're not shrinking anymore." They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that only close friends can sit in without awkwardness. Reagan broke it first. "Do you remember that gala?" Marla blinked. "Last year?" "Of course. He was there." Marla froze. "Who?" "Tristan Vale." Marla's face dropped. "Please tell me you didn't talk to that man." "I didn't need to," Reagan said. "He talked." "I walked." Marla exhaled, tension leaving her body. "Good." Then Reagan smiled. "But next time, he won't be able to talk." "Why?" "Because I'll be on the stage." That same week, Reagan received an email with the subject line, "Orion Tech Summit 2024 to keynote invitation." She stared at it for nearly 5 minutes before opening it. They were offering her the opening keynote, not a panel, not a mention, the stage. And she said yes, not because she wanted revenge, because she was ready to tell the truth out loud. Back in her studio, she pinned the keynote dress sketch on the board. This one wouldn't be black. It would be white, with gold paneling down the sides, sharp, deliberate, geometric. It would carry the shape of power, and not just hers. It would honor every woman who had ever been called too much for showing up in their skin. The Orion Tech Summit had returned, but the air this year felt charged. Everything looked the same. Marble floors, diamond light fixtures, champagne towers, tech billionaires shaking hands while subtly sizing each other up. But she was different. This time, Reagan Miles wasn't clinging to the edge of a room, sipping wine behind someone else's invitation. This time she walked in through the front, flanked by 2 assistants, holding her portfolio and wearing a dress that made silence audible. Soft white matte fabric hugged her curves with gentle reverence, not restriction. Clean lines of gold carved her shape with intention. It didn't apologize. It commanded. Her hair? Curled and pinned, not carefully, but confidently, like chaos she had mastered. The crowd parted as she walked, not because of shock, because of respect. The whispers began immediately. "That's her. That's Reagan Miles. Miles' curve changed the whole fit tech market. I heard she turned down a deal with MetaWare, and at the bar, where this had all started, stood Tristan Vale. This time, he saw her, and his hand didn't lift the glass. He simply watched. Reagan didn't rush her steps. Her heels clicked with purpose. Her face remained unreadable. She looked ahead, not at him, not at anyone in particular, because she wasn't here to perform. She was here to lead. She paused briefly at the center of the room to greet the summit director, gave a warm nod to a group of young female founders, and made her way to the green room. As the doors closed behind her, Marla grinned and whispered, "You just shut down the entire startup scene with one walk." Reagan adjusted her sleeve and smiled. Good. Meanwhile, Tristan remained at the bar, frozen. The same gala, the same air, but the woman, unrecognizable and unforgettable. He didn't sip, didn't scroll. His mind kept looping her walk. A year ago, he barely noticed her leave. Now, he couldn't unsee her entrance. She didn't even look at him. And that was the most devastating part. Inside the green room, Reagan stood in front of the mirror, not checking her reflection but adjusting her breath. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. Marla handed her the microphone pack. "You sure you don't want cue cards?" Reagan shook her head. "No notes." Marla gave a slow, proud nod. "Then go burn the place down, in a good way." Moments later, the summit host's voice echoed through the ballroom speakers. "Please welcome our keynote speaker, founder of Miles Curve Studio, Forbes Tech Disruptor, and one of this year's most talked about entrepreneurs, Reagan Miles." The room erupted into applause before the curtain even parted. Tristan's hands didn't move. He wasn't clapping, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. She stepped onto the stage, elegant, grounded. The spotlight caught her dress, making the gold seem molten. She adjusted the mic, and then she looked out, not just at the audience, but into them. "I was once told," she began, "that I was bold for wearing a fitted dress." Polite laughter rippled across the crowd. She paused. Let them sit with it. That wasn't a compliment. It was a warning. A reminder that my presence made people uncomfortable. Silence. Not confusion. Reflection. I'm not here tonight to comfort anyone's fragility. I'm here because I stopped waiting for rooms to accept me, and I started building my own. Applause. Louder now. She didn't smile for it. She continued. My journey didn't start with venture funding. It started with a sketch that came after a comment meant to reduce me. Instead, it redirected me. Tristan's jaw tightened, because he remembered. All of it. Reagan finished the speech with her head held high. I didn't come here to be palatable. I came to be present, and I hope every woman watching knows, you don't need to shrink to be seen. Standing ovation. Even the summit director wiped her eyes. Tristan? Still seated, still silent. He wasn't resisting. He was wrecked. Because it hit him now, not just the memory of what he said a year ago, but the truth of what he almost erased. She didn't grow in spite of his comment. She grew because she refused to be reduced by it. Backstage, Reagan took a deep breath. Marla handed her water. You destroyed them, Marla whispered. I didn't destroy, Reagan said, exhaling slowly. I revealed. Out in the ballroom, a young black designer in her early 20s clutched a notebook to her chest. She had sketched through the entire keynote, tears in her eyes. She whispered to no one in particular, I can do this too. Tristan Vale had been many things in his life. Visionary, investor, wunderkind. He had walked into pitch meetings where billion-dollar ideas were built off his expressions. He had seen boardrooms pause at his presence. But tonight, he was invisible. Not because no one noticed him, but because someone else commanded the room. Reagan Miles. And for the first time in a long time, Tristan wasn't the focal point of attention. She was. The audience buzzed after the keynote. VCs leaned toward each other in whispered admiration. Young tech influencers posted quotes from her speech with hashtags like #MilesMovement and #NotShrinking. At the bar, the bartender poured another drink without being asked. Tristan's glass remained untouched. She lit them up, huh? The bartender muttered casually, nodding toward the stage. Tristan didn't respond. He wasn't stunned by her success. He was haunted by his memory. The black dress. Her exit a year ago. His comment, you're bold to wear that. He hadn't meant it to land like a slap, but it did. And now, Her triumph echoed back like thunder in his chest. In the private lounge above the ballroom, Reagan stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, sipping sparkling water, shoulders relaxed. She didn't check her phone. She didn't pose for selfies. She simply existed. And even in stillness, she shined. Marla popped a grape in her mouth and smirked. You just took a blowtorch to tech fashion with a 3-minute speech. Reagan tilted her head. Wasn't my goal. Exactly why it worked. A knock interrupted their moment. One of the summit assistants stepped in. Miss Miles, a few attendees have requested to meet with you. VCs from Elevate Capital, Bold Frame Group, and… She hesitated. Reagan raised a brow. And… Tristan Vale. Marla let out a noise between a scoff and a laugh. Reagan didn't flinch. Tell the VCs I'll schedule a follow-up, and tell Tristan there's no meeting. The assistant nodded and left. Marla grinned. Cold. No, Reagan said softly. Clear. Downstairs, Tristan waited outside the lounge doors for 5 full minutes before the assistant returned with the message. He didn't argue. He didn't try to push. He just nodded, and that stung more than he expected. Back in the main ballroom, a small panel discussion was underway about the future of AI and consumer wearables. Tristan was supposed to be moderating. He walked on stage late. Eyes followed him, some curious, others indifferent. The moderator introduced him, but he barely acknowledged it. He sat stiffly and listened as others spoke. He didn't offer ideas, didn't spark debate, just stared blankly ahead, because in his head, Reagan's voice lingered. I stopped waiting for rooms to accept me. I'm not here to comfort anyone's fragility. She hadn't just spoken about herself. She'd indicted the entire culture that he had once ruled without resistance. Later, after the event began winding down, Tristan exited to the rooftop terrace. It was quiet here. Manhattan stretched out like a concrete quilt of blinking lights. And that's where he saw her again, not close, not waiting. She stood by the railing, gazing into the city like it was hers to decipher. He hesitated, then stepped onto the terrace. The door clicked behind him. Reagan didn't turn. She had heard him, felt him, but she didn't acknowledge him. Not yet. He took a step closer, then another, kept a respectful distance. Reagan, he said finally. Her posture didn't shift. Her voice was cool. You remember my name now? I do. Shame it took a stage. He exhaled slowly. I didn't mean it. What I said last year. She turned, slowly this time, her eyes sharp but not angry. You don't get to mean or not mean it. You said it, and I carried it. There was no tremble in her voice, just truth. I know, he said. And I'm sorry. Reagan studied him, really looked, not to intimidate, but to understand what she was seeing. He wasn't smiling, wasn't defensive. He stood in the discomfort like a man without armor. Do you want forgiveness? She asked. No. Then what do you want? To understand what I missed. Reagan tilted her head slightly. Then start by not making this about you. He nodded. That simple motion, no rebuttal, no justification, was the most honest thing he'd done. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away. No reaching for her hand, no asking for her number, just space. And somehow, that was the beginning of something neither of them could name yet. The city below pulsed with midnight life, horns chatter, streetlights bouncing off wet pavement. But on the rooftop terrace of the Orion summit, it was just her. Reagan stood alone, back straight, arms resting on the glass barrier. Her white and gold dress shimmered gently in the breeze, but her stillness outshined the view. Tristan hadn't planned to see her again that night. But there she was, same silhouette, different weight, no longer a guest, no longer invisible. This time, she was the moment, and he, for once, was the one walking into her space. He didn't interrupt her thoughts immediately. He stayed back for a moment, observing, not as a man seeking attention, but as someone trying to find the words that hadn't come a year ago. Reagan finally broke the silence, her voice calm but pointed. You followed me? Tristan stepped forward slowly. No, I needed to breathe. Didn't know you'd be here. Convenient. She didn't look at him. She didn't have to. He cleared his throat, trying again. Reagan. At that, she turned. Eyes cold. Chin tilted slightly upward. You remember my name now? She asked, not with sarcasm, but with steel. He nodded. I never forgot it. She arched a brow. You forgot everything about me the moment I walked away. He held her gaze, refusing to flinch. You're right. Silence stretched between them again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt like air charged before a storm. I shouldn't have said what I said, Tristan continued. It wasn't about you. It was me, hiding ignorance and sarcasm. That's not better. I know. Reagan stepped closer, not to close the gap, but to speak eye to eye. Do you know how many times I've been told I'm too bold, too loud, too much? He stayed quiet. Your comment wasn't new, but it came at the wrong time, from the wrong person, in the wrong room. I'm not asking for forgiveness, he said quietly. Just recognition. Of what? That I saw you. Too late, but I did. Reagan's expression didn't soften. You saw a dress, not a woman. I see the woman now. Her jaw clenched, not out of rage, but restraint. You think saying that makes this better? No, he replied. I think saying nothing would have made it worse. Reagan looked at him, truly looked. He wasn't dressed like the Tristan of last year. No expensive tux, no designer watch. Just a black button-down rolled at the sleeves, slacks, and tired eyes. Not weak, just stripped. She tilted her head. Why now? Because silence protected me last time, and I can't hide in it anymore. The wind picked up, lifting a curl from her pinned hair. Reagan crossed her arms, eyes narrowing, not out of suspicion, but calculation. You don't get points for standing here. I'm not here for points. She nodded slowly, as if confirming he wasn't lying. Then turned back to the city. You made me small, and the worst part is I let myself feel that way, for about 5 minutes. He stepped beside her, leaving distance. Then you left, he said softly. I walked, she corrected. He glanced at her. What's the difference? She looked back at him, eyes burning low. Walking away is a choice. Leaving is what people do when they've been erased. Tristan swallowed hard. I get that now. She turned away again, but her voice remained steady. What do you want, Tristan? He paused before answering. Not a second chance. That surprised her. I don't want to be forgiven or redeemed. I want to understand where I went wrong. I want to know how many other people I silenced without realizing. Reagan blinked. That wasn't what she expected. You're here to learn? He nodded. If you'll let me. She chuckled, dry but not cruel. You think that's noble? No, he replied. I think it's overdue. A long beat passed. Then she said quietly, start by not making this about you. He nodded again. Didn't defend. Didn't reach. Just stood beside her and let the words hang between them like a wire that might never be crossed, but didn't have to be cut. And then, slowly, she turned to walk away. He didn't follow. And somehow, that made her stop. Reagan didn't expect to stop. Her heels had already pivoted toward the stairwell. Her hand was halfway to the railing, but something about how Tristan stood behind her, quiet, still, not even shifting his weight, made her pause. It wasn't surrender. It was restraint, and that made her turn back. Tristan didn't meet her eyes immediately. He was staring down at the skyline, jaw tight, hands in his pockets. She approached, not closer, not warmer, but with a different kind of energy. Like a woman deciding whether this moment was worth her breath. You're standing here, she said, voice low. But I need to ask, are you here because you want to understand, or because you hate being the bad guy? Tristan looked at her then, and for the first time there was no defense in his face. Just something raw. I don't hate being the bad guy, he said. I hate that I didn't even know I was one. She held his gaze. You're used to being listened to. Yes. You're used to rooms stopping for you. Yes. You're not used to being the lesson. No. And now you are. He nodded once. And I accept that. Silence stretched, not cold, just heavy with honesty. Reagan took a slow breath. I'm not interested in turning this into your breakthrough. I understand. I'm not a checkpoint for your evolution. I don't expect you to be. She studied him again. The lack of resistance in his posture. The way he absorbed discomfort without flinching. You said something that stayed with me, she added, voice soft but clear. And not in a poetic way, in the kind that sits in your chest and makes you question your shape. His throat tightened. I'm sorry. That's not enough. I know. She nodded slowly. Then keep listening. He stepped back, not in retreat, but in recognition. And that was the moment she softened. Just a little, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement. She crossed her arms loosely, tilting her head. "So, what exactly are you trying to do here, Tristan?" "Not impress you," he said. "Not win. Just stay honest." Her brow lifted. "I've spent years solving problems with data," he continued, "but I never questioned if I was part of the problem." "That's because you didn't have to." "Exactly." Reagan blinked, once, slowly. The answer was correct, but it didn't mean he earned anything. "So now what?" she asked. Tristan shrugged. "Eve, just like that. You told me not to make it about me." "I heard you." She didn't move. "No request for coffee?" "No." "Can we talk? Moment?" He shook his head. "You've already said everything I needed to hear. I'm not here to spin it into anything else." Reagan narrowed her eyes. She didn't trust easy, especially not men who were used to being adored for waking up. But this man wasn't reaching for redemption. He was accepting discomfort as currency, and that was new. Tristan took a step toward the stairwell, but then paused. He looked over his shoulder. "One last thing," he said. Reagan raised her chin. "What?" "If you ever speak again, on a stage, a podcast, whatever, I'll be there. Not as a fan, not as a friend, just as someone who's still learning." And then he walked. She stood there for a long moment after he disappeared. Not smiling, not angry, just still. The city below continued its rhythm, but inside her chest something shifted. Not forgiveness, but recognition. The weight she'd carried had been acknowledged, not solved, not erased, but seen. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was walking alone through her own story. She turned back to the skyline, this time with a steadier breath. Back inside, Marla found her near the elevator. "Where have you been?" "Outside," Reagan said simply. Marla studied her. "You good?" "I'm clear." Marla raised an eyebrow. "Is that better than good?" Reagan gave a quiet smile. "It's stronger." That night, Reagan went home and sat at her studio desk. She didn't sketch. She journaled. One sentence. Being seen shouldn't feel like a gift. Then she underlined it, twice. The Harlem Tech Alliance was buzzing with its usual Thursday night energy. Young creators, startup founders, and local developers packed the community auditorium. No glitz, no curated lighting, just folding chairs, passion, and a projector that always took too long to boot. Tonight's panel, The Future of Adaptive Tech and Inclusive Fashion. Reagan didn't know he'd be there, not until she stepped onto the stage, clipboard in hand, looked out past the first few rows, and saw him. Tristan Vale, back row, baseball cap pulled low, hoodie, not suit. Alone, no assistant, no tech press following, just him. And he was taking notes. She almost faltered in her introduction. Almost, but the room didn't notice. Because Reagan was still Reagan, commanding, fluid, present. She welcomed the panelists, posed questions about sensor thread design and accessible. Wearable UX nodded thoughtfully through discussions about equity in manufacturing. But between transitions, her eyes flicked to the back row. And each time, he was still there. Pen in hand, listening, not recording for social media, not trying to be seen, just present. After the event, while guests networked and organizers folded chairs, Reagan found herself alone with Marla near the side exit. Marla handed her a bottle of water and followed her gaze. "Don't say it," Reagan murmured. "I wasn't," Marla replied. "But he's been sitting back there for over an hour." Reagan took a slow sip. Not once did he look at his phone. Marla exhaled. "Okay, now I'll say it. What does he want? Maybe nothing. You don't buy it?" "I don't know yet." The next event was at an adaptive design pop-up in the Bronx. No formal invites, no public guest list, just flyers, email chains, and word of mouth. And there he was again, back row, this time standing near the wall with a small notepad and coffee in hand. No questions asked, no eyes lingering on her, just observation. Reagan pretended not to notice. She worked the room, met with young seamstresses, gave advice on digital, fabric tracking, and offered a short demo on flex stitch calibration. But when the event ended and the crowd began to thin, she turned to see him walking out. He didn't come over. He didn't nod. He just left. By the third event, A forum on adaptive tech funding hosted at Columbia, Reagan no longer played surprised. She saw him before she entered the building, already seated, already quiet. This time, she made the choice. After the panel, she approached, hands folded, stance casual, but her tone was anything but soft. "You stalking me?" Tristan looked up, blinked, and then shook his head once. "No." "Then what is this?" "I'm studying." She tilted her head. "Studying what?" "Why I got it so wrong." Her breath hitched slightly. Not from flattery, from the honesty. He continued, "I'm not here for you to see me. I'm here because I want to understand how many others I failed to see." Reagan studied his face. There wasn't shame on it. There was work, real work. The kind that came from dismantling your own mirror, not just cleaning it. "I don't need you shadowing my life," she said calmly. "I'm not here for you," he repeated. "That's what people say right before they make it about them. I'll leave if you ask me." She hesitated. That was the test, and he passed it. "No," she said after a beat. "Stay. Just keep staying quiet." He nodded, and then, once again, didn't reach, didn't linger. He left. Back in her studio that night, Reagan sat at her work table, fabric sprawled around her. She thought of his face, still but open. She traced a hemline slowly. She didn't know what this was, but for the first time she didn't feel like she was being watched. She felt like someone was listening. The next time Reagan saw Tristan, it was in Harlem. Not at a panel, not in a conference room, but in the back corner of a local design lab that partnered with young adaptive fashion startups. It wasn't even open to the public, just a space where creators met weekly to test textile tech and workshop prototypes. He didn't belong there, but he wasn't pretending to. He sat on a folding chair, wearing the same muted hoodie, jeans, and sneakers. No entourage, no attention, and once again, no phone, just a legal pad filled with messy handwriting. Reagan spotted him halfway through explaining heat-activated thread to a group of interns. She didn't pause, didn't signal, but the moment the session wrapped, she made her way toward him. He saw her coming, didn't stand, didn't smile, just waited. She folded her arms. "You're getting good at showing up. I'm trying to be better at knowing when not to speak." She gave him a look. "You're not owed a badge for that." "I'm not asking for one." Reagan studied him for a second, then asked plainly, "Why here?" Tristan tapped the side of his notepad. "Because this is where the work is being done, and I've spent too much time thinking I was the work." That made her blink, not because it was poetic, but because it was accurate. She sat down in the chair beside him, no warning, no permission asked. He looked surprised, but said nothing. "You taking notes for a blog?" she asked dryly. "No. Documentary?" "No." "Then what?" "I'm documenting for myself." She raised an eyebrow. "For what purpose?" Tristan hesitated, then turned the page. He held the notebook out to her. She took it. Read it. Lines, notes, phrases, diagrams of wearable interfaces next to captions like, Reagan said, "Design shouldn't correct bodies. It should celebrate them." Reminder, language shapes reaction. Bold isn't neutral. Stop using inclusive like a selling point. Her hand lowered. "I'm not trying to steal your work," he added. "I'm trying to understand how much of the industry I helped build has excluded people like you, and how much of that was silent approval on my part." She was quiet now, and that quiet wasn't distance. It was consideration. A young designer passed by. "Hey Reagan, the sensors for the knee brace dress are lagging again." "I'll be there in a second," she called back. Then she looked at Tristan. "You really want to understand?" He nodded. "Then help me solder these sensor nodes." He blinked. "I'm not asking you to design. Just sit, watch, ask nothing, move when told." "I can do that." She stood. He followed. Inside the prototype room, Reagan clipped up her curls, rolled up her sleeves, and motioned him toward a corner table. She handed him a spool of wire and pointed to a circuit layout. "You mess this up, you burn the entire lining." He gave a slight smirk. No pressure, no applause either. She turned back to the table. The two of them worked side by side in near silence. She calibrated. He stripped wire. She attached the sensor. He passed her the heat gun. And slowly something shifted, Not in the air, but in the rhythm. They weren't opponents. They weren't symbols. They were two people doing the kind of quiet labor most headlines would never celebrate. And that, strangely, felt like progress. Later, as she packed up the fabric samples, he lingered near the door. "I'll be at the Midtown workshop next week," he said quietly. She glanced at him. "I didn't invite you. I didn't ask for one." A beat. Then she replied, "Bring gloves next time. That lining stains skin." He smiled, but didn't thank her. He just nodded and left. Reagan exhaled, not out of relief, but out of release. For once, she didn't feel like someone was trying to break her down or build her up. Just meet her where she already stood. Soho was wet with mist, not enough to open umbrellas, but just enough to cling to your skin and curl the ends of your hair. Reagan didn't mind it. She walked with her hands in her coat pockets, dress pants brushing, just above her ankles, kitten heels clicking softly on the pavement. Beside her, Tristan matched her pace. Not too close, not trying to lead, just walking, like he'd learned the rhythm of walking with her, not ahead of her. The panel had ended over an hour ago. Another successful event, another Q&A, where Reagan handled questions with sharp wit and unflinching clarity. She wasn't tired, but she was full. The kind of full that comes after you speak a truth out loud and feel the weight of being heard. They hadn't planned to walk together. But when she exited the building and saw him leaning against the brick wall, hands in his pockets, hood down, just waiting, she'd paused. Not surprised, just assessing. Then she said, "You can walk if you don't talk." He nodded. And here they were. Tristan glanced sideways. "You always walk after events?" "I don't like being chased by compliments." He nodded. "You don't like being chased, period." She smirked. "That too." A few seconds passed in silence. Then he asked, "You ever take cabs?" "Only when it's late, or when I've worn something ridiculous and regret it." He chuckled. "That happens?" "I design for people. Not every design is meant for me. I learn the hard way sometimes." He nodded again. "That's honest." Reagan stopped under a building awning as the drizzle thickened. She looked at him. And for once, she didn't feel the need to calculate what he wanted. So she asked plainly, "Why haven't you made a move?" He blinked. "What?" "You've had plenty of chances," she continued. "Panels, events, studio. You never reach, you never linger, you barely speak." He exhaled. "Because I know what it looks like when men try to be helpful just to get close." She didn't speak. Let him continue. "I don't want to be a storyline in your arc. I just want to be here. Without needing to take anything." That made her chest shift. Not melt. Just loosen. They stood under the awning for a beat longer. The sounds of the city pulsed around them. Reagan tilted her head. "You're not scared of being overlooked?" "I used to be scared of being ignored," he said. "Now I'm scared of being loud when I should have been quiet." She gave a small, thoughtful hum. "Progress, you think?" "Only if it's consistent." He didn't smile, but his eyes warmed. Reagan pulled her coat tighter. "You hungry?" He raised an eyebrow. "Not a date," she added quickly. "I just don't want to sit alone at that all-night cafe on Mercer." He nodded. "Then I'll sit across from you and pay for my own tea." Smart man. The cafe was warm, its windows fogged slightly from the change in temperature. Inside, jazz played softly through ceiling speakers. Not curated, just classic. They ordered chai and pistachio shortbread. No wine, no posing, just comfort. Reagan sipped her tea, then set it down. "I used to think presence was dangerous," she said quietly. "Like if someone stayed long enough, they'd see something wrong with me." Tristan didn't interrupt. She continued. "Growing up, my body was always the conversation, never my mind. If I was too smart, I was aggressive. If I wore something tight, I was trying too hard. There was no version of me that wasn't a threat to someone's comfort." Tristan's jaw clenched slightly, but he stayed silent. Reagan leaned back. "That's why I built a brand, not just a business. I wanted a place where I didn't have to shrink to fit someone else's bias." He finally spoke, and I tried to reduce all of that to one stupid comment at a bar. She met his gaze. "You didn't reduce me. You just didn't recognize me." The table was quiet again. Then he said, "I want to learn how to stand next to you without touching your light." She blinked. Slowly, not because it was poetic, Because it was true. When they finished their tea, she rose. "I'll walk you to the corner," she said. He smiled. "You sure? I'm not doing it for you. I just want to make sure you don't get lost in Soho and end up at a tourist trap." They laughed. Together. As they neared the crosswalk, rain still gently falling, Tristan turned to her. "One last question." She raised an eyebrow. He asked, "Would it be okay if I kissed you? Not to start something, but to respect this moment?" Her lips parted. Then slowly, she nodded. Under the awning again, no crowd, no eyes, no obligation, he stepped forward. No heat, no hunger, just presence. His lips met hers with quiet reverence. It wasn't an ask. It was an offering. And when he pulled back, she didn't move. She just whispered, "That wasn't terrible." He smiled. "I'll try not to let it go to my head." And then she turned and walked into the rain. Reagan didn't text him that night. She didn't need to. The kiss wasn't a promise. It wasn't a setup. It was a moment, sealed without expectation. But somehow, in the days that followed, everything shifted. She sketched differently, slower, more layered. She moved through meetings with a lightness she hadn't noticed in years. Even her team sensed it. Marla made a joke about her glow. But Reagan didn't laugh, because it wasn't glow. It was peace. Not because of a man, but because for once, the energy around her didn't ask her to defend herself. 3 days later, they saw each other again. Not by accident. Not by arrangement either. It was at a fabric innovation conference in Tribeca. She was on a panel. He was in the back row again. No pad this time, just listening. Afterward, as guests funneled out and handshakes exchanged, she caught his eye. He waited. She gave a slight nod. No words. That was the invitation. They didn't go to a cafe, or a rooftop, or anywhere performative. They walked. Quiet streets, humid night, her heels in hand. His jacket slung over one shoulder. They ended up outside her building before either had spoken. She paused at the gate. "You want to come up?" she asked. His voice was steady. "Only if you're sure." She nodded once, and that was it. Reagan's studio apartment wasn't grand, but it was warm. Plants, shelves, of fabric bolts, sketches tacked to the walls like living blueprints. He stepped inside carefully, like entering sacred space. She locked the door behind him, tossed her heels by the wall, and turned on a soft desk lamp. No overheads, warm light, soft shadows. She didn't offer him a drink. She didn't ask what he wanted. Instead, she moved across the room and unpinned a sketch from the wall, one of the earliest Miles Curve designs, the one that started it all. She turned to him. "This dress was born the night you tried to reduce me." He nodded. "And it changed everything." She stepped closer. "I don't need you to undo it," she said, "but I want you to understand what it cost to survive it." "I do." Reagan unbuttoned her blazer slowly, folding it over the back of her chair. "I didn't invite you here to impress me," she said softly. He swallowed. "I didn't come to impress." "Good." Then, without ceremony, she reached out and touched his chest, not suggestively, not inviting anything more, just connection. Tristan placed his hand over hers. Neither moved. Then, slowly, he leaned in, not toward her lips, but her forehead. He rested there, breath steady. Reagan closed her eyes. Because this wasn't performance. It was presence. When they finally kissed again, it wasn't because the night demanded it. It was because it felt like the most respectful thing they could do. Mouths met gently, not rushed, not starved. His fingers brushed her cheek, tracing down her jawline with reverence. She stepped closer, pressed into him, not to seek safety but to offer trust. He pulled her in by the waist, anchoring her gently. No control, no urgency, just rhythm. They made it to the couch, not stumbling, not tearing. Reagan sat first. He followed. She leaned into him, her knees tucked beneath her, one hand resting on his shoulder. He looked at her. She nodded. "Okay," she whispered. That was all he needed. He kissed her again, deeper this time. His hands stayed respectful but curious, memorizing rather than claiming. She pulled back, slightly breathless. "Tristan?" "Yes. This isn't about fixing anything. I know. If this feels like redemption, stop. It doesn't." She searched his eyes. "Then keep going." He lowered his forehead to hers again, breathing with her, matching her inhale. Her exhale. He unbuttoned her blouse slowly, watching her face with every movement. She guided his hand to the clasp of her bra, then whispered, "Be here." "I am." When her top hit the floor, she didn't shrink. She didn't cover. And he didn't stare. He received, like a man who'd spent months learning the difference between undressing a body and meeting a soul. His shirt came off next. She ran her hands down his chest, not for stimulation, but study. He gasped softly. "Still okay?" she asked. "Yes," he whispered. "More than okay." Their bodies moved slowly, intentionally. Reagan climbed into his lap, guiding his hands around her waist. "I don't need a performance," she murmured. He looked up. "You never did." She kissed him again, this time with weight. And when they finally gave in to full touch, it was less like surrender and more like alignment. They didn't rush, didn't strain. No dominance, no pressure, only devotion. And when it was over, they didn't speak for a long time. She rested her head on his chest. His hand traced slow circles on her back. Their breath synced again, 2 heartbeats choosing peace. Finally, she whispered, "This doesn't fix the past." Tristan kissed the top of her head. "I don't want to fix the past," he replied. "I want to build something that doesn't repeat it." Monday morning came early, but Reagan was already at her studio before sunrise. Coffee, jazz, a dozen bolts of fabric waiting to be sorted. Her calendar was full, product deadlines, investor follow-ups, and fittings. But her mood? Focused, grounded, unshaken. The night with Tristan hadn't thrown her off balance. If anything, it made her more herself, not because of what they shared, but because of what he hadn't taken. By 9 a.m., her small team arrived, 3 designers, 2 interns, and her operations lead. The space buzzed with the usual startup chaos, swatches flying, sewing, machines humming, laptops propped up with charger cords everywhere. Then, around 10:30, the door opened, and in walked Tristan. No announcement, no grand entrance, just a man holding 2 boxes of folded fabric and a quiet nod. One of the interns blinked. "Is that?" Reagan raised a hand. "Yep." She didn't explain. Didn't need to. She met his eyes once, gave a slight tilt of the chin, then pointed to an open table near the back. "Fold, sort, no talking." "Yes, ma'am," he replied. For the next 2 hours, he did exactly that. Folded fabric, sorted by color and material, measured twice before labeling, didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, didn't try to stand out. He followed the flow of the room like he belonged there, even though everyone knew he didn't. And still, it worked, because he respected the rhythm. Marla arrived at noon, arms full of lunch bags and eyes full of suspicion. She spotted him immediately. "Oh, he's here now?" Reagan didn't look up from her cutting mat. "He's helping." "With what?" "Brooding in the corner?" "Folding, sorting." "Staying quiet." Marla crossed her arms. "Is this a new internship program?" Reagan finally looked up. "Marla." Her friend raised a brow. "Yeah?" "He's not here to prove anything." Marla stared at her for a long second, then turned her gaze toward Tristan, who was now carefully wrapping silk into tissue paper. "Good," she said, "because I don't want to have to break anything expensive." Reagan smiled. "I know." By mid-afternoon, the mood had shifted. Tristan was still folding. Marla had begrudgingly handed him a fresh bolt of mesh lining, and one of the interns had offered him tea without prompting. That was the moment Reagan noticed. He wasn't performing humility, he was living it. Later, as she reviewed fabric cost reports at her desk, Tristan quietly approached. She looked up. "Break time?" she asked. "Only if I've earned it. You didn't cry when Marla handed you that bolt. That's worth a few minutes." He chuckled and leaned on the table. "I wanted to ask you something," he said. She motioned for him to sit. He pulled up a stool. "When you started this," he asked, "did you ever imagine this room, these people?" Reagan looked around, at the threads scattered across tables, at her team laughing over misprints, at Marla pretending not to be watching them. "No," she said honestly. "I imagined doing everything alone." "Why?" "Because I didn't think I could trust anyone to carry the weight of my vision." He nodded. "And now?" She turned her eyes back to him. "I still don't trust easily," she said, "but I've learned to let people walk beside me, As long as they don't try to steer. He looked down at his hands, calloused now from 2 days of folding and taping. I'm not here to steer, he said. I'm just trying to be part of the journey. Reagan reached out and ran a thumb across one of his fingers. You're on the road, she said. Stay in your lane, and we'll see. That night, when the team packed up and headed out, Tristan lingered. He didn't ask to stay. Reagan simply said, lock the back door when you leave. And that was the most trust she'd extended to anyone in years. She didn't invite him to her apartment again that night. She didn't need to, because what they were building wasn't made of urgency. It was made of presence. And presence, when handled with care, becomes the strongest kind of foundation. Sometimes trust isn't earned through declarations. It's earned through quiet repetition. If you've ever watched someone earn their place in your space, not by force, but by consistency, drop a comment that says showed up, stayed. And don't forget to subscribe, share, comment your thought, and hit like button if you believe. That respect begins when someone walks into your world without trying to rearrange it. Because next, it won't be about folding fabric. It'll be about unfolding desire. The studio was quiet after hours. No sewing machines humming. No laughter from interns. No Marla side-eyeing Tristan from the corner. Just the low hum of the city beyond the window and the soft glow of amber Edison bulbs dangling above fabric-strewn tables. Reagan stood barefoot in the center of the room, dressed in a black silk robe, the same kind she'd designed for the first Miles to Curve editorial shoot. It hugged her like memory, soft, sharp, and honest. She didn't pace. She didn't prep. She waited, because she'd asked him to stay. And he had. Tristan emerged from the back room slowly. No suit, no curated appearance, just a soft gray t-shirt and black jeans, vulnerable in its simplicity. He looked around the space, then at her. His voice, low. Is this okay? She nodded once. Yes. A pause. I didn't come here to finish anything, he said. I didn't ask you to. Another beat. I'm here if you want to be touched like you matter, he said quietly. That made her breathe, not in surprise, but in relief. She stepped toward him, the soft rustle of fabric the only sound in the room. When she reached him, she didn't kiss him. She placed his hand on her waist and whispered, touch me, but don't make me feel like an assignment. His eyes never left hers. I won't. His hands moved slowly, like he was afraid of rushing, afraid of shattering the permission she was offering. She leaned into him, not because she needed to be held, but because he chose it. He didn't grip her. He met her, palms at her sides, fingers grazing fabric, not peeling it away. She slipped her robe open. Beneath it, she wore nothing, but she didn't flinch, didn't cover. She stood fully in the light, hips, stomach, thighs. And he didn't react with hunger. He reacted with awe, like her body was not to be possessed, but understood. He bent slightly and pressed his lips to her shoulder, then her collarbone, then lower, across her chest, her stomach. Kisses that weren't rushing toward a goal, kisses that stayed. Reagan's breath deepened, not because of arousal, but because of recognition. She had never felt this scene. When she reached for his shirt, he helped her pull it over his head. Her fingertips traced the outline of his chest, not to flatter, but to feel. He let her lead, let her explore, and when she whispered, I want you to take your time, he nodded and kissed her ribs, one by one. They moved to the couch, never losing eye contact. She straddled him, her knees on either side of his thighs. Her hands rested on his shoulders. His rested on her hips. They stayed like that for a full minute. No thrusting, no friction, just stillness, just being. Then she leaned down, kissed him, slowly, with weight, and whispered, You're not here to save me. No, he murmured. I'm here to witness you. She pressed her forehead to his. Then watch me take what's mine. And she did. She guided him inside her, slow, controlled, present. He groaned softly, not from the sensation but from the honor. Her pace wasn't frantic. It was deliberate. She rolled her hips with rhythm, her palms planted on his chest, her breath syncing with his. No pretending, no performing, just truth in motion. He kissed her jaw, her throat, her sternum, held her with care, not to anchor her, but to join her. And when she moaned, it wasn't for him. It was for herself. Their climax came not in a wave of chaos, but in the steadiness of safety. She trembled. He held her. She sighed into his neck, and he stroked her back, not to soothe, but to remind her, "I'm still here." They didn't speak right away. She rested against him, breath slowing. He kissed the side of her head and whispered, "That wasn't just intimacy." She nodded. "That was trust." She pulled back to look at him. "I never wanted to be someone's milestone," she said. "You weren't. Then what was?" He smiled, eyes soft. "This was me showing up with nothing to prove." Reagan didn't post photos of them together. No Instagram stories, no tagged tweets, no cozy selfies with latte art and subtle captions. Not because she was hiding anything, but because their connection wasn't built for display. It was built for presence. And Tristan? He understood that. Which is why when he walked into a midtown venture conference beside her, he didn't reach for her hand. He walked beside her, 2 steps behind when she needed space, 2 steps forward when she needed support, but never in her way. The ballroom was flooded with polished investors and tech founders pitching big ideas with buzzword-filled decks. A world Reagan had grown used to navigating with a sharpened smile and emotional armor. This time, she didn't need the armor. Because the man at her side didn't amplify her. He protected her space. She'd been invited to give a fireside chat with the director of a major West Coast fund. The topic, adaptive technology in everyday luxury. The room was packed. Tristan stood at the side, not on stage, not backstage, just standing quietly near the exit, arms crossed, eyes on her, not possessively, but proudly. As Reagan took the mic and began to speak, someone near the back leaned over to Tristan and whispered with a smirk, "So, you're with the curvewear girl now?" It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal, dressed as casual banter. Tristan turned to the man slowly, eyebrows raised. "She's not the girl," he said clearly, his voice calm but precise. "She's the future." The man blinked, tried to laugh it off. Tristan didn't. He just turned his eyes back to the stage and kept watching her. On stage, Reagan caught the shift in body language, saw the man sink slightly into his seat, saw Tristan's steady posture out the corner of her eye. She didn't break flow, but inside, she smiled. Because she'd spent too many years being the one forced to deflect or correct. It was nice, for once, not to be the one doing the work of educating. After the event, as guests gathered around for questions and business card exchanges, one of the younger women approached Reagan with stars in her eyes. "Can I ask you something personal?" Reagan nodded. "How did you find someone who doesn't shrink around your shine?" Reagan glanced toward Tristan, who was now helping one of the coordinators stack chairs. She smiled softly. "I didn't find him," she said. "I built my piece, and he found his way to it." The young woman nodded like that sentence had just unlocked something in her spirit. And maybe it had. Later, as they rode down the elevator together, Tristan glanced sideways. "You handled that comment like it didn't touch you." "It didn't." "You heard it, though." "Of course. And I saw the way you responded. That was louder than anything I could have said." He reached for her hand, not for display, just for grounding. She let him take it. They walked the rest of the block to her driver in silence. But it wasn't tension. It was comfort. Like 2 people who didn't need to fill the air to know exactly where they stood. Back at her apartment that evening, she pulled off her heels and collapsed onto the couch. Tristan poured her a glass of ginger seltzer, her favorite, and joined her without asking. "Do you ever miss being unseen?" he asked quietly. She looked at him, amused. "Only when I go to CVS in a bonnet." He laughed, then grew serious. "You're really out here shifting the narrative." She sipped her drink. "No. I'm just owning mine." He nodded. "And you're making it easier for others to own theirs too." She leaned back. "You're starting to understand." Their phones buzzed. News alerts, clips from the conference already circulating online. One short video clip had gone viral already. Tristan Vale, billionaire founder of Venture AI, correcting a dismissive remark with the line, "She's not the girl. She's the future." It was everywhere. Hundreds of thousands of retweets. Comments pouring in, some praising him, some questioning his motives. Reagan chuckled and handed him her phone. "They've already labeled you the CEO Feminist of the Year." He sighed. "I didn't say it for that." "I know. You mad?" She shook her head. "Not mad, just watchful." "Of what?" "The line between allyship and performance." He set the phone down. Then hold me accountable. I will. And she meant it. Tristan didn't flood Reagan's world with gestures. There were no random flower deliveries, no overly dramatic surprises, no grand romantic speeches. Instead, he was consistent, showing up where it mattered, quietly anchoring her days with intention. When Reagan had to fly to D.C. for a last-minute investor pitch, Tristan didn't text her 50 times. He sent one message. If you need anything, support, silence, or snacks, I'm a call away. She didn't reply, but during the layover, she reread the message twice. When she returned, there was no pressure to recap the trip. He just asked, "You feel good about it?" She nodded. He smiled. That's what matters. Back in the studio, he became part of the fabric, literally. On Wednesdays, he folded fabric. On Fridays, he fetched lunch. On Tuesdays, he sat silently in the back during fittings, answering emails with earbuds in, never intruding. Marla still watched him with narrowed eyes, but her scowl had softened to suspicion laced with curiosity. It was during one of those quiet days, mid-afternoon, low sunlight spilling through the windows, when one of the interns asked, "So, are you two, official?" Reagan looked up from her work table, mildly amused. "Official how?" "You know, Instagram official, public." Reagan smiled without looking up. "We're real official." The intern blinked. "What's the difference?" Reagan finally met her eyes. Public needs validation. Real needs presence. The intern nodded slowly, like she'd just been handed a truth her heart didn't know it needed. Tristan heard the exchange from the corner. Didn't say a word, just returned to folding muslin. Because this wasn't about proving anything. It was about being part of her world without rearranging it. At night, he didn't push to stay over, but when he did, it was never about passion alone. Sometimes they just read. Sometimes he traced the scar on her shoulder she never talked about. Sometimes she listened to his stories about his mother, how she raised him with discipline, but never gentleness, how success became the only language he learned to speak. And slowly, brick by brick, Reagan let him see her. Not the polished version, not the keynote speaker. Just the woman who sometimes got tired, sometimes cried in the shower, sometimes questioned everything she was building, and he never flinched. One night, as they lay on the floor, her head on his chest, his fingers idly, tracing the ridges of her knuckles, she whispered, "What is this to you?" Tristan took a long breath before answering, "This is the first time I'm not trying to build something to be admired." She closed her eyes. "That means you finally understand," she said. At an industry brunch 2 weeks later, a venture partner made a lazy joke at Reagan. His expense, something about wearable tech for women who don't wear the sample size. Tristan didn't speak immediately. He leaned forward slowly, looked the man dead in the eye, and said, "Say that again. And then say it to every woman in this room who carries her body with pride." The room went quiet. The man chuckled nervously and shifted in his seat. Reagan didn't have to say a word, because he had already said enough. Later that day, as they walked to the car, Reagan glanced over. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, but you did it anyway." He stopped walking, turned to face her. "I don't protect you because I think you need it," he said. "I protect you because you've earned peace, and I won't let someone steal it just because they're used to not being checked." She nodded once, and that, right there, was the quiet kind of love that made her feel safe. Not owned, not praised, just respected in real time. The studio was different at night. The table still held fabric bolts and half-pinned sketches, but under the soft glow of Edison bulbs and the hush of late hours, everything felt closer, more human, more tender. Reagan sat cross-legged on the floor near the sewing station, her silk robe loose around her, her hair down, curls soft and wild. No makeup, no polish, just her. Tristan sat across from her, back against the wall, legs outstretched, a mug of lukewarm tea cradled between his palms. Snow Allegra played low from a Bluetooth speaker tucked behind a stack of garment bags. The night held no destination, only stillness, and the kind of silence that welcomed truth. Reagan looked at him, really looked. The gray t-shirt clung to his chest. His jaw was shadowed. His eyes were heavy but focused, like he'd worked all day and still had energy left only for her. "You're staring," he said quietly. "You're sitting in a room filled with mirrors and fabrics," she replied. "It's hard not to." He smirked. "What do you see?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, softly, someone who isn't afraid to be seen anymore. He set his mug down, stood slowly, crossed the space between them, and knelt in front of her, close but not assuming. She watched him, then opened her robe, letting it fall from her shoulders, puddling around her waist. She wasn't trying to seduce. She was inviting clarity. "I'm not dressing this up," she said. "This body, these scars, these thighs, they're not up for revision." Tristan didn't reach. He just nodded. "I've never wanted to edit you," he said. "I've only wanted to understand what makes you real." He leaned in, lips barely grazing her shoulder. Her breath caught, not from nerves, but from memory. How long had it been since someone touched her without expectation? His hands moved to her waist, slow, warm, reverent, not claiming, not correcting, just resting. She reached for the hem of his shirt and lifted it over his head, ran her hands down his chest, his ribs, his lower back, not searching, just learning. When he kissed her, on her sternum, the curve of her breast, the soft skin at her side, it wasn't a countdown to anything. It was a catalog of care. She stood, let the robe fall away completely, then stepped back, standing bare before him. He rose slowly, eyes steady. No hunger, no hesitation, just awe. "I'm more than okay," she whispered. "I'm mine, and you're in my space, and I'm honored." She stepped forward, placed his hands at her sides. "Touch me," she said, "but like I'm a story you're reading for the first time." His fingertips brushed her thighs, her stomach, her hips. He kissed the inside of her wrist, the slope of her neck, the dip of her lower back. She shivered, not from chill, but from being met without shrinking. They lay down on the rug. She climbed over him, guiding his hands once more, not to take, to trace. Their bodies moved in tandem, soft hips, open palms, mouths grazing without force. He whispered her name like punctuation, and she responded with breathless affirmation. "Yes, right there." Like that. She didn't hide her sounds. She didn't stifle her weight. She let herself be held, fully, and he never broke rhythm, never shifted into performance, only mirrored her. When she came, it wasn't an eruption. It was a slow wave that carried her forward, then back into his arms. He held her, face buried in her neck, his own release quiet, grounded. They stayed tangled, no words, just skin against skin, sweat cooling slowly between them, heartbeats sinking again. Later, she traced the line of his jaw with one finger. "Why don't you ever rush?" "Because nothing this sacred," he said, "should ever be handled like it's disposable." She smiled, not wide, just deep, because finally, someone had touched her like her body was not a burden, but a home. The soft hum of the city outside faded to a distant rhythm. Inside the studio, the floor beneath them held more than their bodies. It held history. Hers, his, the kind they'd never fully put into words but had started to rewrite together. Reagan lay curled against Tristan, one leg draped over his, her fingers slowly tracing invisible lines across his chest. Neither of them rushed to speak. There was no performance in their silence, just permission. She lifted her head, eyes steady on his. "Do you know how many years I spent hiding during moments like this?" He brushed a curl away from her cheek. "Tell me." She sat up slightly, resting her hand on his stomach. For a long time, intimacy felt like a transaction, like I was offering something just to be held, not for who I was, but for how well I fit someone else's craving. His hand reached up, gently resting on the back of her neck. Not to pull her in, just to remind her, "I'm here." She continued. "I used to keep a shirt on, dim the lights, position my body so that no one could see the parts I wasn't ready to name out loud. And now?" he asked. She exhaled. "Now I'm not covering anything. Not my stretch marks, not my softness, not my strength." He kissed her shoulder. "You never had to." Tristan sat up, letting the blanket fall slightly from his back. Reagan reached for it, but he stopped her. "Don't hide me either," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You hide?" He nodded. "People see the title, the money, the name. They don't see the mess, the pressure, the man underneath all the expectations." She shifted closer. "Then show me." He pulled her hand to his chest, held it there, let her feel the tension under the skin, the breath that caught when he let go of his own shields. I've never let anyone hold this version of me, he whispered. Reagan leaned forward. Then let's not wear masks for each other. They kissed again. But this time it wasn't a spark. It was a flame, steady, slow burning, not out to impress, but to warm. She moved over him with grace, not choreography. He followed her lead. And when they connected again, it wasn't about reaching a peak. It was about staying present. Her hips rolled with intention. His hands explored without rush. They locked eyes, breaths sinking, mouths parting only for gasps, not from urgency, but from recognition. He whispered her name, and she smiled into the sound. She said his like a prayer, not for saving, but for anchoring. When they both found release, it wasn't a climax. It was a settling, a shared exhale that said, This is what it feels like when nobody's performing. They lay in silence, wrapped in a single blanket, skin slick with sweat, hearts loud in the quiet. She pressed her cheek against his chest. Do you feel it? He nodded. All of it. The Edison bulbs above cast soft halos over their skin. There was no shame in how they moved now. No panic in the afterglow. Just truth. Later, Tristan traced a finger down the curve of her thigh. You're the most honest thing I've ever touched, he murmured. She looked at him. Because I finally stopped apologizing for existing, and I stopped needing to be impressive to feel worthy. She nodded. No more masks. No more edits, he added. They laughed. Soft, breathless, easy. Because it felt good to be whole in front of someone who didn't ask you to explain your softness or decorate your strength. At some point, they fell asleep on the studio floor. No pillow, no perfect angles, just trust. The next morning, Reagan woke first. Tristan's arm was draped across her waist, his mouth slightly open in the most unguarded, unpolished expression she'd ever seen. And she smiled, because there was nothing performative about this. No status, no strategy, just two people finally resting without armor. The emails came faster than Reagan could read them. Podcast feature request, NPR. Cover inquiry, Vogue Digital. Exclusive, Fashion plus Tech Spotlight, Fast Company. The video of Tristan's now viral remark, she's not the girl, she's the future, had spilled into mainstream channels, pulling Reagan into the center of an attention storm she hadn't invited. Every outlet wanted a soundbite. Every headline wanted the image, not of her brand, not of her designs, but of the couple, of her and Tristan, together, on display. Her publicist texted twice, This is a moment, we need to capitalize. Reagan typed, then deleted. Because she wasn't built to be capitalized. Not this way. That evening, she sat in her studio with the lights dimmed, phone face down. Tristan entered with dinner, takeout from her favorite Caribbean spot in Brooklyn. He placed the bag on the table without speaking, knowing the weight in the room didn't come from hunger. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling. They want a profile, she said. Of us. Together. He didn't move. And I said no. He walked to her, hands in his pockets, then nodded. Good. She blinked. You're not upset? I'm relieved. That stopped her. He sat across from her. I didn't show up to be paraded, he said. I'm not here for the optics. If being next to you means being background to your mission, then that's exactly where I want to be. Her jaw clenched slightly, out of emotion, not frustration. You mean that? I mean every word. They ate in silence for a while, the kind of quiet that didn't need apologies. Then she said, There's this idea people have, that when a woman succeeds, someone had to prop her up. Tristan leaned forward. You didn't need propping. She raised an eyebrow. No, but they'll write the story like I did. He nodded slowly. Then let them, he said, while you keep writing the one that matters. A few days later, Reagan was invited to speak on a national panel, Disruptors in Design. She accepted. Alone. No +1. No shared spotlight. Just her. As she walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in applause. Not because she was with someone, but because she stood in her own name. She talked about adaptive design, about how tech can't change the world if it refuses to dress the world it claims to serve, about how her team at Miles Curve wasn't chasing perfection, they were chasing presence. Meanwhile, Tristan watched from backstage, arms folded, heart full, not with pride in her, that had always been there, but pride in himself, for knowing when not to center himself. For once in his life, his silence was the most powerful contribution he could make. After the panel, reporters still tried to pull her into relationship chatter. She smiled politely, but her answers remained focused. She wasn't going to water down a movement for the sake of a headline. That night, back in her apartment, Reagan curled into the corner of the couch while Tristan massaged her feet. "You're too good at this," she murmured. He grinned. "I Googled reflexology last week." She raised an eyebrow. "Just trying to be useful," he added. "You are," she whispered. "But not because of that." "Then why?" "Because you let me take up space without trying to stand inside it." Later, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced, paused, then passed it to him. A trending tweet. He's not the reason she's thriving. He's the proof she didn't need one. Tristan handed it back. "Accurate." She chuckled. "You're really okay with not being seen?" He leaned in and kissed her temple. "I see you. That's enough for me." Reagan hadn't slept, not because she was anxious, but because she knew the time had come for a conversation that couldn't be put off any longer. Marla, her grandmother, her lighthouse, had been silent throughout the headlines. No congratulatory text, no subtle "I saw the news, baby." Nothing. That morning, Reagan booked a ticket and flew home to Baltimore. No entourage, no Tristan. Just her suitcase, and a heart full of questions. Marla opened the door like she always did, hand on hip, eyes inspecting. "You lost weight," she muttered. "You ain't eating right in that New York." Reagan stepped into the house, smiling. "Nice to see you too, Ma." The house hadn't changed. Same sunflower tablecloth. Same plastic-wrapped couch nobody was allowed to sit on. Same scent of cinnamon and eucalyptus lingering in the air. Marla poured tea without asking and sat. Reagan sat across from her, legs crossed, heart pacing. "Go on," Marla said, without lifting her gaze. "Go on what?" "You didn't come here for tea." Reagan laughed, but it didn't hold. "I'm dating someone. I saw Keys. I know who he is." Marla took a sip of tea. Reagan braced. "I know he owns the company. I know he was the one that denied your first patent. I know he used to be the kind of man you swore you'd never touch with a prayer stick." She looked up. "What I don't know is if he's changed." Reagan swallowed. "He has. Men don't change, baby. This one did." Marla raised an eyebrow. "Oh? How?" Reagan breathed deep. "He stepped down when I needed space. He backed me publicly when I didn't ask. He tells people he's proud, but never pretends to be responsible." Marla's eyes didn't blink. Reagan went on. "He lets me speak, Ma. And he listens like my words are gospel." A long pause. Then Marla asked, "You love him?" "I do." "Does he love you?" "He does." Another pause. Then Marla placed her tea down slowly, leaned back in her chair, and said, "Then I suppose I better meet him proper." Reagan blinked. "You're not mad?" "I was." "And now?" "I watched that panel you did. You stood up there and didn't once hide behind his name. You wore your own skin. And baby, you made it look like armor." The kettle whistled. Marla didn't move. "You know how long I prayed you'd never settle? That you'd know your worth so loud a man would have no choice but to echo it?" Reagan nodded, softly. Marla stood, walked over, and placed both hands on her granddaughter's cheeks. "Just make sure, when you love him, you don't shrink to make him comfortable." "I won't. And if he ever forgets why he fell for you," Reagan's voice cracked, "I'll remind him." That night, Reagan and Tristan FaceTimed while she sat on the front porch. "She wants to meet you," Reagan said. Tristan exhaled. "Wasn't sure I'd pass the screening." "You haven't." "Wait, what?" "She said you gotta survive the Sunday dinner test." Tristan laughed. "I'll bring cornbread. She's gluten-free." He froze. "I'll bring flowers. She's allergic." He narrowed his eyes. "You're messing with me." She grinned. "Absolutely. Sometimes the real test of love isn't public praise. It's the quiet nod of a woman who taught you how to stay rooted in storms." Marla didn't need to like Tristan. She only needed to see that Reagan wasn't dimming for him. And when she did, she finally smiled, not because Reagan had someone, but because Reagan had stayed someone. The night wrapped itself in silk and promise. New York shimmered beneath them, its skyline a crown of lights that blinked like distant confessions. Reagan stood on the balcony, wind teasing the edge of her curls, the weight of the evening pressing softly on her chest. Behind her, the rooftop glowed with candlelight, long ivory tapers flickering in crystal holders, delicate jazz threading through the air, and the smell of roasted sea bass and truffle lingering from the plates they hadn't touched in a while. Tristan adjusted the lapel of his deep charcoal blazer, watching her. She wasn't dressed to impress, she never had to be. But tonight, the open-back silk wine-colored dress and bare shoulders made it hard for him to breathe. Not because of her beauty, but because of what she carried beneath it: history, hope, and a heart that had every right to run. But stayed. For him. She turned, holding a wineglass by the stem. "I don't know how you managed to keep this private." He smiled. "Paid the building manager an indecent amount." She laughed, sipping slowly. Jazz swelled behind them, slow and buttery. A saxophone held a note that made the city hush. "Tristan." He looked up. She stepped closer, her eyes reflecting the lights of the skyline like mirrors. "What if this doesn't last?" Her voice wasn't afraid. Just honest. He didn't flinch. He took her glass, set it on the marble ledge, and stepped so close her breath caught in her throat. "Then we'll build it to last." She blinked. He continued, voice steady. "If it cracks, we'll reinforce it. If it burns, we'll plant something from the ashes. If it breaks," he touched her chin, "we'll learn how to make art from broken things." Silence. Then, "That sounds exhausting." He chuckled. "It will be." She tilted her head. But nothing else has ever felt this right." Reagan stepped back, arms wrapping herself briefly before dropping. Her voice dropped too. "I'm scared of becoming dependent. Of needing you so much I forget how to breathe without your air." Tristan's jaw tightened. He moved toward her again, slow, intentional. "Then let's agree," he said. "We don't lose ourselves. We grow, side by side. And if we ever feel like we're shrinking, we pause, we talk, we fix it. Not because it's easy, but because it's us," she whispered. He nodded. "And I'd rather fight for us every day than float through anything with someone else." She looked away. The wind played in the silence. "I don't need a ring," she said suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. "I didn't offer one." She turned sharply. "Not like that. I mean, I don't need one to know this is real." Tristan's gaze softened. He didn't reach for a box, didn't kneel, didn't promise forever like it was something cheap or easy. Instead, he reached for her wrist, gently flipped it over, and kissed her inner pulse. Slow, deliberate. "I vow to protect this rhythm," he whispered. "As long as it beats near mine." Reagan's lips parted. Not for words, but breath. Tears welled, not out of sadness, but recognition. This wasn't a proposal. It was a confession, a covenant, a choice to stay awake in the middle of the fire. Behind them, the song ended. A new one began. The candles flickered taller, as if reaching for something invisible. Tristan wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her close. No ring, no priest, no crowd. Just two souls, naked in truth, daring to promise without a script. In a world drunk on diamonds and spectacle, the most sacred vow is the one whispered with no audience. No rehearsed speeches, no photo ops, just two flawed people saying, "If this breaks, we'll rebuild, and if it doesn't, then love, like blood, will keep flowing." The final course had been cleared, but neither of them had touched it. Dessert wasn't necessary when sweetness was already dripping from the air between them, heavy with silence, full of meaning. Reagan sat at the edge of the rooftop lounge, her heels off, knees drawn close to her chest, looking out over the city she never thought would feel like home again. Behind her, Tristan adjusted the last candle, his sleeves rolled up, arms dusted with the flicker of flame. No servers, no champagne pop, no velvet box, just the skyline. And him. He walked over slowly, barefoot now too, letting his presence announce itself gently. She didn't turn. She didn't have to. His shadow settled beside her. "You're still here," she murmured. "I told you I would be," he said. There was a pause. Then she whispered, "People always say that. Right before they leave." "I'm not people," Tristan said softly, "and I don't make announcements before I abandon someone. I make promises when I intend to stay." Reagan turned. "Promises are easy to make, Tristan. Harder to keep." He knelt beside her, not on one knee in proposal, but both knees. Equal, level, like a man coming to meet his match where she stood, not where he wanted her to be. "I'm not offering you a fairy tale," he said, "and I'm not promising forever because it sounds poetic." He reached for her hand, thumb grazing the inside of her palm. "I'm promising something real." She studied him. The line of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, the unhidden hope in his eyes. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was letting her see the man who had built a tech empire but didn't know how to rebuild a heart until she handed him the blueprints of her own. "No ring," she teased. Tristan chuckled. "You said you didn't need one." "I don't," she said, eyes suddenly glistening. "But I need you to mean this." He nodded. Then he said the words that stopped time. "Your existence isn't a favor, it's a fact." The wind paused. The candles didn't dare flicker, and Reagan's breath caught like something sacred. He continued, "Loving you isn't a reward for your patience. It's not a thank you for enduring me. You're not a second chance I'm trying to earn. You're the only story I was ever meant to finish writing." Reagan placed her hand over his. "I don't want a man who gives me the world if I beg," she whispered. "I want a man who gives me space to breathe, space to belong." He smiled. "Then let's stop pretending like love is something we need to perform." This time he said, voice steady, "We stay." She looked down at their hands, then back at him. "No running?" she asked. "No hiding," he answered. "No ultimatums?" "Only one," he said. "That we fight for each other, not against each other." Reagan laughed. It wasn't a forced laugh. It was the kind that came from deep in the chest, unfiltered, feminine, full of freedom. And Tristan laughed too. Suddenly, a small, sleepy voice interrupted their moment. "Are you guys done talking now?" They both turned. And there she stood, Ruth, wrapped in a hotel robe 2 sizes too big, rubbing her eyes, clutching her stuffed bunny. I smelled chocolate. Reagan laughed louder now, reaching for her daughter. "I told you she'd find dessert on her own," Tristan said, shaking his head. "She's a tracker," Reagan joked, pulling Ruth onto her lap. Tristan sat beside them, arms wrapping around them both. 3 bodies, 1 rhythm, no contracts, no stage, no ring, just skin and soul. Above them, the skyline blinked like it was trying to compete with their glow, but failed, because nothing could outshine what had just been spoken, not out loud, but deep into the fabric of their lives. Some proposals come with diamonds, others come with truth. Some vows are made before a crowd, others are whispered on rooftops, barefoot, breathless, and finally whole. Comment, seen. If you believe love should never come with conditions, and if you believe that staying is sometimes louder than leaving, share, like, and subscribe. Let someone out there know that love doesn't need to be perfect to be permanent.